Since the bells are back on, I thought they might do the minute of silence and stuff again, but maybe not. Okay, so last class we had shifted a little bit where our plan was to let you see your 2-5 quiz, ask questions from that, and then finish up the test review last class and then test today. But since I couldn't be in here last class for some other stuff I had to do, we switched some stuff around. So hopefully you guys got at least questions 33 through 44 completed on the semester test review, since those are question types from this last unit. And if you got more than that done, that's great, since you do need to complete it, even if you plan on exempting our final. Try to give it to you early so you guys can start chipping away at it. Otherwise, it'll be a lot to try to do the day or two before. But we need to finish up our test review and give you a chance to ask questions about your 2-5 quiz. So on your desk this morning was your 2-5 quiz. So if you take a couple minutes to start looking at that. And of course, if I saw just a small mistake, I try to write in a hint or two. But that stuff will be on your test, which is next class, 2.5 stuff. So that should give you an indication of what you need to look at again. And then 2.6, 2.7 is all the rational function stuff. So we didn't really use the textbooks there, so I don't know that 2.6, 2.7 means anything to you, but everything with rational functions. X-intercepts, holes, vertical asymptotes, horizontal asymptotes, slant asymptotes, domain, graphing, the stuff that we've basically been practicing the last week and a half or so. So let me give you a couple minutes to look over your 2-5 quiz so that you have an idea of which questions you'd like to ask. And for those of you that can see all of your mistakes and you're not going to have any questions, you need to move on to your test review. Your test review is 116, and it looks like this. So I actually gave this to you weeks ago because I asked you to do the last page of it, and I didn't number it because I wanted it to be closer to the test. But now I'm telling you it's page 116. And if you can't find yours, I do have some extra copies over there on the table. But you really probably should find yours because you should have the last page finished. So if you can't find it, I guess you're going to have to redo the last page. But let me give you a couple minutes to look over your 2-5 quiz, and then I will start asking which questions you'd like me to go over with you.
Can I take the quiz tomorrow, by chance?
No, you've already missed your chance. I've already called you in a couple times for TGS. You didn't make it.
That was my bad. I was gone this track.
I think I've been calling you since last week. You need to double check. Once the quizzes are passed back, there's not much I can do for you.
That's good.
Here's a blank copy at least so you can see what was on it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so on your 2-5 quiz, that was stuff like quadratic formula, factoring to find zeros, knowing the fundamental theorem of algebra, which is the number of zeros equals the degree, knowing that imaginary zeros come in conjugate pairs, changing zeros into factors, dividing out zeros to get higher order polynomials down to quadratics, sometimes with long division, maybe sometimes with synthetic division, multiplying factors together to come up with functions that would have certain zeros, and knowing what it means by product of linear factors. So this should be a little bit less than half your test, but it's still a good portion of it. So from your 2.5 quiz, which questions did you miss that you'd like some help on, or questions that maybe you got right but you don't remember what you did because it's been a little bit.
For B, question 2.
They actually both say form B, so your number 2, does it say x to the 4th minus 256?
No, x to the 4th minus 625.
625, okay. Okay, so this question is asking you to find the zeros, find all the zeros, whether they're real or not. So that's where the function equals 0. Because it's degree 4, you should end up with 4 zeros before you move on. And I always start off my questions like that, and I think if some of you guys would start doing that, you would realize that you forgot like a simple algebra step. Easy to lose half credit there because those are only 2 points. So if you don't get all 4 zeros correct, the next best would be one of the 2 points. Now with all of these questions, they kind of work in different ways. If it's a quadratic, you can factor or use quadratic formula. If you're given a 0, you can divide it out, get it down to a quadratic, and then solve it. But on this one, you weren't given any hints, you don't have a calculator, you couldn't just look at some of the x-intercepts to get some of the zeros. So your only option in this one was to factor it, and it would be the difference of 2 squares. And ideally, you factor it completely. So the sum of 2 squares doesn't factor more, but the difference of 2 squares does. So where this guy equals 0, where this guy equals 0, there's 2 of them. Now sometimes with this, I would actually say this is probably the most common careless mistake. You guys see this, and then you're trying to go to the zeros, but you're making like one tiny arithmetic mistake. This doesn't factor more. If you think it factors, multiply your 2 factors together and see that it doesn't simplify to x squared plus 25. The difference of 2 squares factors, the sum of 2 squares does not factor. But if you set this equal to 0 and solve, you would get 5i, and if you made 4 blanks, you would remember taking the square root of both sides, you need plus or minus. So there was quite a few people that got this factor right, but then said like it was 5 and negative 5, like you just glanced at it too much. And that's a pretty easy one to solve. So force yourself to slow down a little bit there. Okay, is that enough for that one?
Yep.
And then number 3, same type of question. Again, we can work it out too, just a different type of factoring. So sometimes factoring is all you can do. Okay, what else from your 2.5 quizzes? Okay, if you do find some of that later, that is fine. I just don't want to waste their time. So, unless you worked ahead here, you should be on 116 now, which is the test review. And again, you already did the back page, and you're welcome to so instead of, sorry about that, giving you another 10 rational functions to do where you have to find the x-intercepts and the y-intercepts and the vertical asymptotes and the horizontal asymptotes and the slant asymptotes and graph it and all of that, you will be expected to do all those things on the test, but you've already practiced that a lot that way already. So on the test review, it kind of rephrases it, gets you to think about these from a different angle. So like questions 1 and 2 presents two functions where one of them has a y-intercept, one of them doesn't. So it forces you to think, what does it mean to have a y-intercept? How could one have a y-intercept or not? So you need to figure out which one does have a y-intercept, and then find the y-intercept of the one that does have one. And then do the same thing for x-intercepts, horizontal asymptotes, vertical asymptotes, domain, basically each of these, but just kind of looking at it from a different perspective. On 15-16, it wants you to graph. So if you don't think vertical asymptotes help you with your graph, then don't find vertical asymptotes. But if you think they do help, then go ahead and find them. There's no requirement on what you find, but all of those skills, do what you think you need to do to be able to get those graphs. And then just a different twist on it on page 3. These are graphing, but multiple choice. So you could just figure out maybe one thing, like y-intercept, and if that narrows it down to one choice, then great, you've got your answer, move on. But if you also need to find something else to narrow it down more, or something else to narrow it down more, do it until you narrow it down to a single choice. Okay, so I don't think many people have got a head start on this, but in case you did, is there any questions from this that you know you're going to ask, want to ask? Want to go ahead and just ask them now? Okay, then let me give you some time to work on it, and then I'll bug you for some questions in about 15 minutes. So do as many as you can. It's only been about 9 minutes, but do a quick check-in. Any questions from this test review that you found yet?
Number 16.
16. All right, so question 16 just asks us to graph. It doesn't specifically say what we have to do. So something that you could do, but would be terribly inefficient, is to just plug in, oh, you might want to see it, just plug in a ton of points, plug in different x values, plug them in, solve for y, keep plotting those, and if you did enough points, then you would figure out what it looks like. Just you would probably have to do 20 points before you were pretty confident. So then it really just kind of comes down to, I don't know, of all of those different rational function skills, which ones you think are the easiest. So I would personally go out and find the y-intercept, because y-intercept, just plug in 0 for x and solve. And if I do that, I get -2 over 0, which doesn't make sense. Can't divide by 0. So I know this guy never touches the y-axis. Doesn't help me much, but it is something that I know about it. I guess I could just go ahead and factor the numerator and factor the denominator. Numerator would be a trinomial, and the denominator was just GCF. But I know if I have this information, I know any numbers that make just the numerator 0 end up being x-intercepts. So there's a couple points. I know any number that makes just a denominator 0 are going to be vertical asymptotes. So maybe you don't think that helps you with the graph, but I certainly think it speeds up my graph quite a bit. I would probably also consider horizontal asymptote, especially since that's usually pretty quick. Looks like the degrees are equal, so y equals leading coefficient over leading coefficient would be 1 over -1. So I could graph that dashed line too. And I don't know, there's some other stuff that I guess that sometimes we ask. Slant asymptote doesn't have one. Domain's not going to help me get the graph. There was no holes, so that doesn't help me get the graph. So really the last thing that you can do to make this a little bit more accurate and add some confidence here is just force yourself to plug in some more x values. Make more points. So again, don't plug in x equals 10. It's not even on the graph, and it would be hard to compute without your calculator. But you can plug in 1 and be able to compute that reasonably easy. Bless you. And I get -1. There's another point for my graph. I'd kind of like to know where it is on this far right. So I'm going to try x equals 4. The numbers might be too big for me to pull off without my calculator, but I can at least try. Looks like it would be -5/2, which is like -2.5. Okay, and now I would say I have enough information for sure. Again, feel free to do more points if it makes you feel better about your graph. But all a horizontal and slant asymptote tells you is what it approaches on the far right of the graph and the far left of the graph. A big misconception, I don't know why students assume this, but a big misconception is that you can't cross the horizontal asymptote. You can't cross it at the ends of your graph, But if your graph has 3 or more sections, it can cross it in the middle. And that's where I think getting these extra points here helps you see that, hey, it actually does hit this in the middle of this graph, this little middle section. So based on the direction of this, it's going down to negative infinity on this side, so positive infinity on that side. Based on the direction here, it's going to negative infinity on the right, so positive infinity on the left. And then all of that's consistent with my points. But again, if you wanted to plug in more points, plug in more x values and solve for y, you can see that they should land about where I have it estimated. So that's how I would approach it. So again, nobody says you have to find the equation of the holes. You don't have to find the x-intercepts. I guess you don't have to find the y-intercepts. But if you want to know what that graph looks like, pretty much all of those skills really kind of help construct that. So I kind of indirectly still took it upon myself to find all of those things.
Okay, so you can cross the horizontal asymptotes but not the vertical one?
Well, the reason why you can't ever cross a vertical one is because if it's a function, each x value has exactly one chance. So if x equals 3 doesn't exist, that was his one chance to be x equals 3. Y values, you can hit the same y value multiple times, like right here. So if your graph has 3 sections, like a far left, a middle, and a far right, it can't cross it on the far left or far right because it's just approaching it, but it can sometimes cross in the middle. It doesn't have to, but it can. And that's where you have to force yourself to plug in a couple more points to see what's going on. If you just guess, if you guess that it goes down, half the time you're going to be right. If you guess that it comes back, half the time you're going to be right, but you don't really want to leave it up to a coin toss. The other thing I would say, like, is if I didn't get this, I've kind of mentioned this in the past, but let's say I didn't find this point. If you thought, well, let's say I did find this point. If you thought it turned around for some reason and did this, if it's going up on the right side, it's going down on the left side. But then if you know it's supposed to go through this point, you start getting confused because it's like, how does it go through this point but then approach this line? And usually when your graph isn't making sense like that, either you're making an assumption that you shouldn't be, or you've got some kind of mistake. All of it kind of fits together nicely, should fit together nicely. Even one wrong found thing can make your whole graph seem really, really, really off. So, okay, does anybody have anything specific about 16 while it's still up there? Okay, that was a good one to ask because this one really kind of ties all of it together. If you guys can graph those rational functions, then answering one question at a time, like on the front page, should seem pretty easy. Also, the third page, just matching up graphs should seem pretty easy too, because just do as little as possible until you narrow it down to one choice. Okay, another question or two. Okay, I will reset the timer, give you some more time to work. Oh, keep going. 3 and 4?
Yes.
So, questions 3 and 4 are about x-intercepts. One of these has a x-intercept and one of them does not. So, of course, the one that does have an x-intercept we should be able to find. So, x-intercepts are going to be numbers that make the numerator 0, but not the denominator. So, over here, if I try to figure out where the numerator equals 0, kind of like I was talking about on your quiz. Sometimes you guys are just like trying to solve this in your head too quickly and you're saying 2 and negative 2. This numerator equals 0 at 2i and negative 2i. 2i and negative 2i aren't going to show up on your graph, so they're certainly not going to show up as an x-intercept. So if this guy's numerator can't equal 0 for a real number, then he cannot have an x-intercept. So 3b is the one that does have an x-intercept. So notice that his numerator does equal 0 at 9/7. Now, if it also made the denominator 0, it would be a whole instead of an x-intercept. So if you try to like figure out what numbers make the denominator 0 and you try to factor this, well, it doesn't factor and it doesn't solve nicely. But the good thing is if you imagine plugging in 9/7 here and here, all you have to see is that it doesn't go to 0. So 9/7, even though I don't know what numbers make the denominator 0, I know 9/7 doesn't. So it makes just the numerator 0, so that would be an x-intercept. Okay, one more. Okay, then let me give you another chunk of time to get a few more under your belt here.
Can I have a final exam review? Which
Yeah.
are they up with?
I got it.
It's up here somewhere, but. Read it here last time.
I guess not.
I had asked them to look at questions 33 to 44 last time.
Okay, it's already been another 10 minutes, so see if you got some more questions.
I just had a question about
The domain, so like 9 and 10.
yeah. So if it has like the number 10,
Uh-huh.
I'm pretty sure it's like 3i. So would that even like exist or would it still have that?
Yeah, so when you're talking about domain, for like questions 8 and 9, domain implies that you're interested in real numbers. It's like asking what numbers could you graph.
Yep.
So on this one, when you found when the denominator equals 0, those are not real numbers. So you don't really have to take those out of the domain. So if there's no real numbers that make division by 0, that means you can plug in everything. So all real numbers. Whereas question 9, there's two numbers that make it division by 0, 3 and -3. 3 is a whole, -3 is a vertical asymptote. Domain does not care what it looks like, just that you can't plug in those. So you would have to skip -3 and then skip +3. Anybody else got something specific about 9 and 10 more than that? Okay, other questions? You got ready to go? Yes, Peggy.
Could you remove question 28?
28. Let's see. .28 is probably one of the longer, more difficult questions. So most of the rational function stuff, if you know the definition and the process to find each of those things, usually they're not too much work. Slant asymptote's kind of a pain, but you rarely have to do that. But in section 2.5, some of these questions take a few steps. So 28 specifically says find the remaining zeros and factors, given that this is a 0. So even though it just says remaining, I'm just going to go ahead and do all of them. It's a 4th degree, so I know that there's going to be 4 zeros, which means that there would be 4 linear factors. And they're only giving me this one. So probably the most important part of this, because there's not really anything that you can do if you don't know this one, but imaginary zeros always come in conjugate pairs. So if 2 minus I is a 0, 2 plus I is a 0. So indirectly that one's given to you. So the idea in this question, and there's a few others like this, but this is the one that's going to be the messiest, I would say. If this is a 4th degree, if I could divide out this 0, I could get it down to a 3rd degree. And then if I can divide out this 0, I get it to a 2nd degree. And a quadratic, I can always use quadratic formula, even worst case scenario. So I really want to divide these out. But to divide these out, you really need to change these to factors, multiply your factors together, and then divide them out at the same time instead of one at a time. So to change a 0 into a factor, you need to do x minus each one of these and distribute the minus. It's not x plus. I saw that a few times on your 2.5 quiz. X minus the 0, distribute the minus. And so if I take these two messy factors, if I distribute these and multiply these together, then I will be left with a much nicer looking quadratic. So we need to distribute x to all 3 of these, and then minus 2 to all 3 of these, and I to all 3 of them. So 3 things times 3 things should give us 9 things, but after we combine like terms, all of the I stuff should go away. Minus xi plus 2i minus 2i. We've got an x squared that has no one to combine with. Minus 2x can combine. And then right here, because we know I squared is -1, this is minus a -1. So really that's like a +1, which combines with the +4 to get you +5. So what I'm doing is, this and this are saying the same thing. This just looks a lot nicer to me. This is a lot easier to work with than this is. But this quadratic represents these two factors, and since they're factors, these two should divide into the original polynomial evenly. So this would be an instance where we have to do long division, because you can't do synthetically divide by that. And so it looks like x squared would be the first part. X squared times x squared gives you x to the 4th. Then distribute it to this one. Then distribute it to this one. Change all of the signs and add. And then do it again. It's like -4, because -4 times x squared is -4x squared. These make 16x. These make -20. And when you change the signs, everything cancels out and gives you a remainder of 0, which should happen. What it means to be a factor is that it divides into it evenly. So it's understandable that it's hard not to make an arithmetic mistake within this or this, but we know that it's supposed to go into it evenly, so we've got a little bit of a check. If that wasn't true, we need to keep working. But all of that was really to expose this quadratic, x squared minus 4, which I can factor as the difference of two squares if I want the other two factors, or figure out where each one of those equals 0 if I want the other zeros. So similar thought process to question 27, just a little bit messier, because you had to do long division, you had to change these into factors correctly, and you had to multiply those factors correctly to get this correct quadratic. Question like that, all you can really do is make sure that you understand the process and how all this fits together, and just try to force yourself to practice it a couple times to get a little bit of the arithmetic work. Okay, one more from any part, doesn't have to be from the back page.
Number 9.
Okay. Okay, so number 9 was the one that was about domain. So domain has to do with what numbers can you plug in. So there's only 2 ways to mess up domain. If you take the square root of a negative number, you have to take those numbers out of the domain. But rational functions, none of these have square roots in them, so you don't really need to worry about that for these questions. The other type of numbers you need to take out of your domain are numbers that give you division by 0. So if you set this denominator equal to 0, there was 2 numbers that give you division by 0, so you have to take those 2 out. These are the 2 numbers it can't be. Now if what makes it hard about it to you is writing your domain like this, then what you can do is just do a little number line. A number line, but I can't plug in -3 and I can't plug in +3. So I can plug in all the stuff to the left of -3. Oops. Just looks like that. I can plug in all of these x values between -3 and +3. And I can plug in all of these values bigger than 3. If you make yourself write it on the number line like that, you can visually see those intervals a little bit easier. Okay, let me set one more timer for about 10 minutes here, and that'll give you one more chance to speak up and ask what you need to ask. Of course, you can also drop in during advisory tomorrow if you need some extra help or if you didn't get to something that you decide you do need help on. I guess the other plug I would make in for putting a good, strong effort into this last test is if you know you're taking the final, either you're not going to be able to exempt or you're choosing not to exempt. If you want to try to get from a B to an A or whatever, keep in mind that this stuff will be on the final too, and you will need to also be reviewing other stuff from this semester. So it would make studying for the final exam a lot easier if you felt really solid about this information. So consider putting in a little bit extra effort, getting a strong test grade here, and then when you need to review for the final, this could be one thing or one unit that you don't feel like you need to look back at because it's fresh in your head, and if you put in the effort now, then you shouldn't have to put in the effort again in a week. So. also 3 assignments I'll be picking up for some homework points. Those were 114, which was the one-sided page where we just were looking at x-intercepts, vertical asymptotes, and holes. There was 115 that we spent 2 full class periods on, where we finished all of the rational function notes and you practiced graphing and finding all the parts of 14 of them. And then finally there's 116, which is this review. All of those got opened up in Google Classroom this morning, so if you didn't hear which ones I said, you can just check Google Classroom, but those will be the ones that I asked for before we start the test on Wednesday. And of course you were welcomed and encouraged to turn them in early, but you do not have to. Well, it's already been another 10 minutes here, so as I said, I give you one more chance to ask any other questions from the test review. Anything you want me to refresh your memory on or show you how to come up with the answer? Okay, well you guys still have about 20 minutes of class, so if you do find something, please just bring it up here or call me over, either one. If you've not put an alarm in your phone about looking over your stuff for your test, then please do that now before you forget. And those 3 assignments in Google Classroom, make sure that you have those fully complete so that you'll get those easy homework points.